All right, hello, everyone. If you're new here, I am Amos Wilson, or AC Wilson, author of the pirate fantasy series Gwambi Tetralogy, My Father's Land, My Father's Ghost, and My Father's God, and then coming out later this year, hopefully, My Father's Will. Anyway, today I'm here to talk about the most historically authentic books I have read. I did a series of shorts earlier. You can go back and watch them where I talk about how I look at historical accuracy in either films or books. And that is like the three measures, the three matrices I use to determine how historically authentic a book is you have the historical authenticity of the material culture, the timeline, and then the general atmosphere of the setting. So you can look at those shorts. They're pretty quick to watch if you want kind of like my thinking behind how I evaluate historical authenticity in a novel. But today I'm going to be looking at the 6 best novels I have read that are the most historically authentic. So we'll start off with a Sir Walter Scott novel. And for those of you who do not know, and hopefully that's not many of you, Sir Walter Scott kind of invented the historical fiction genre. The reason there is historical fiction is because of Sir Walter Scott. So there's a lot of his books that I could choose to highlight as being the most historically authentic. But today I really want to highlight The Fair Maid of Perth. It's not a very flashy edition I have here, but I do have a physical edition. Fair Maid of Perth. And why I wanted to highlight this one is because while Scott is known for just being his meticulously detailed with his research of the material culture of these historical time periods that he is portraying in his novels, what I love about The Fair Maid of Perth is how it delves into the city life of Perth in 1200s in Scotland. And what Scott really succeeds doing in this book that I've never ever seen done, whether in fiction, historical fiction, or fantasy. I've never seen any other author pull this off to the extent that Scott did in this book, was show what city or burgher life would be like in the Middle Ages. We have this kind of weird distorted view of city life in the Middle Ages, and we don't usually think about how actually you would literally had more rights as a human being if you lived in a city. And so this kind of, while maybe unsanitary conditions, was also a really privileged position to be in because literally you had more political rights as a human being if you lived in a city. And so the tension between being a burgher, your association within your guilds, and how that gives you more, the political clout that gives you, was really fascinating. And that's explored in this book. Fair Maid of Perth really explores all the complexities of those legal ramifications. And that's really fascinating. While, I mean, Scott is a bit dated, you only want to go into reading this book if you have a familiarity with reading other pieces of classic literature. But especially if you're familiar with some of the older language, this is just a delightful book to read. It's a fun adventure. And like I said, really authentic to the experience of living in a city in medieval Scotland. Moving on, we're going to go to The Drawing of the Dark by Tim Powers. Now, Tim Powers is another author that, like Sir Walter Scott, there's lots of his books that I could highlight. He typically does very historically authentic books, especially his secret history books. I haven't read a whole lot of his books, but every one of them I've been really impressed by the level of historical detail he goes into. And what I want to highlight with this book in particular, The Drawing of the Dark, is how well he abides by a historical timeline. This is really tricky when writing a novel to literally hold up a perfect historical timeline, because you kind of have to shift events around to make a more interesting story. That's part of storytelling, is arranging events in a way that fits with a conventional story structure. So to be able to create a fun, engaging story that follows a conventional story structure without tampering at all with the timeline, down to like really nitpicky details that Tim Powers strictly adheres to, is super impressive. Super impressive. So this book takes place at the Siege of Vienna in, 1516, I think. So kind of Renaissance, Italy and Germany. And just a really fun snapshot into that period in time. I really knew I was going to love this book when he starts highlighting specific Italian fencing schools that I was like, oh, yep, that's a real Italian fencing school. And yeah, so just like really minor details that Tim Powers nails in this book. But at the same time, as historically authentic as this book is, it is a fantasy novel. So it also has like elements of like King Arthur, and there's like a batch of beer that is important to the cosmic balance of the universe. It is a little bit wild and crazy, but I loved it, especially for just the historical authenticity of it all. So that's Drawing of the Darks by Tim Powers, and that was such a fun book. Moving on to one of my newest reads and newest favorites. That is, of course, Angel Down by Daniel Kraus. This book is a World War I novel, which, if you have been on this channel at all, you will know that I am obsessed with World War I. World War I is so fascinating to me. So this book is set in 1917, I believe, as an American soldier is given a mission to enter no man's land and save an injured comrade. However, he discovers that the comrade in question appears to be a literal seraphim angel knocked out of the sky by artillery. And chaos ensues as Bagger attempts to figure out what in the world is happening with a literal angel in the middle of World War I. This book is just beautifully written. It's a little bit experimental, but I think it pays off in dividends. And the way Kraus casually drops just really meticulously accurate details about like the kit of an American soldier or how no man's land was fantastic. I've never read a World War I novel that dragged me so deeply into the visceral experience of World War I. And a lot of that actually has to do with the experimental nature of the prose, how the sentence never ends. It just drives on and on and on, and it's remarkable. Like, the experience of reading this book is unlike anything else I've ever had. Beyond just being a great book, being really historically authentic, it is such an incredible experience reading this book. So I can't highly recommend this one enough. Angel Down by Daniel Kraus, beyond just being a really historically authentic book, is an amazing book in and of itself. There's a reason it won the Pulitzer Prize. And next we have Master and Commander by Patrick O'Brian. This book and the entire Aubrey and Maturin series is spectacular. I love this series so much. And like, you can't get any more historically authentic than this book series. This is a naval series set during the Napoleonic Wars and follows the career of Jack Aubrey and his best friend, Stephen Maturin, the Irish nationalist and surgeon on board his ships. So the friendship between these two men is spectacular. I love the whole series, but again, highlighting specifically the historical authenticity, everything down from the dialects that are spoken, the vocabulary that Jack and Maturin use is spot on for historical accuracy. The just really meticulously researched details about sailing ships in the Napoleonic time period, the way they talk about the political structuring of the Navy. This, like, it is so meticulously researched. Like, I don't know any other book series that is quite this spot on for its historical authenticity. This series is amazing. Again, I cannot praise this series enough. You really need to read Master and Commander if you haven't already. Because also, I should say, it's not just a book about naval warfare. You also have almost Jane Austen-like passages dealing with Maturin and Aubrey trying to get married and make a good catch, and problems with in-laws. It's a book unlike anything else I've ever read. This whole series is just fantastic. Just fantastic. Highly would recommend this book series. Next, we want to move on to Essex Dogs by Dan Jones. This is a historical fiction novel. Actually, it's the first of a trilogy, and the whole trilogy is great. But this novel is set during the beginning of the 100 Years' War between England and France. And it follows a group of soldiers, the Essex Dogs, as they storm the beaches and then move on with King Edward's soldiers in their first campaign in France to try to take over France. So Dan Jones, the author, is a medieval historian, and you can tell the amount of knowledge that Dan Jones brings to the subject matter is amazing. And I think specifically what Dan Jones really captures in this book is the mindset of medieval English people. The atmosphere is spectacular. He doesn't go quite as deep into the material culture, which is fine. I think that's not as important. And what he really nails is the atmosphere, the mindset, the setting, the general worldview of all of the characters is fantastic. Fantastic. This is pretty grim dark, so if you're a fan of Joe Abercrombie, you'd really love these books. Dan Jones, I think, easily gives Abercrombie a run for his money in his character writing and his kind of grim, dark, gritty narrative. It's fantastic. One thing that's really fascinating about the Essex Dogs, though, is that not only is this a history book about the 100 Years' War, obviously, but Dan Jones is also purposefully making connections between the invasion of France under King Edward at the very beginning of the 100 Years' War with the invasion of France by the Allied powers during World War II. They follow a similar geographic pattern, and so to build the characters of the Essex Dogs, he's very overtly pulling on themes of World War II comradeship. So Band of Brothers is very clearly an inspiration for this book, and that kind of blending between this idea of war that we're familiar with from World War II memoirs, like Band of Brothers, with this less familiar period in history of the 100 Years' War was super cool. Super cool. He did have to sacrifice a little bit of historical authenticity to pull off that parallel sometimes, but I think it paid off. I think it really paid off to make modern audiences have a greater sense of familiarity with the 100 Years' War, with this medieval history. I can't really praise this series enough. I don't know why more people aren't hyping this series, because this is a revelation. This literally is a revelation. And finally, my last book I want to highlight for its historical authenticity is Slewfoot by Brom. This book actually really surprised me when I read it, because I knew it was a horror novel and it's about a witch trial in New England. And there's a common problem with these horror novels, or horror movies even, that look at witch trials in New England, which is they kind of lose the historical authenticity because they want to take seriously that these people actually are witches, and so are bringing in stuff from the modern occult, and that's fine for an interesting movie, but it really misses the whole picture of what was going on in the witch trials, because there wasn't any occult stuff going on. And I should preface this by saying I'm not a specialist in this. I find the witch trials fascinating and really tragic, and so I have read quite a bit on the New England witch trials, the Salem witch trials specifically, obviously. That's the most famous ones. So I went into this book skeptical, because I had seen people addressing the witch trials in New England in kind of a cliche and almost borderline disrespectful way. Disrespectful, I felt to the historical women who were murdered. And that is not what this book is at all. I was blown away by the depth of accuracy, actually, to this book. Just little details about how the witch trials worked that Brom nails in this book really, really well. Specifically talking about how so many of these witch trials actually trace back to land disputes, and that's kind of seems to be what actually is going on socially in these tragic trials. Is it actually is about women who had the ability to own land, which was not the norm. And also the tension between the civil powers who are prosecuting these witch trials with the religious powers, the pastors, who oftentimes really objected to the witch trials going on. And I felt like Brom did a fantastic job building that tension into the story, where on the one hand, the story is about the abuse of religious power and a really harmful religious experiment, the Puritans, that happened on American soil. But at the same time, also acknowledging the Puritan pastor's discomfort with the trials and his attempts to stop it in the face of the civil authorities who are actually the ones prosecuting this, and this weird tangle between the civil authorities who are ostensibly prosecuting for a religious crime, but underneath is really about property rights, and the the church authority, who should be in charge of the religious crime and isn't. It's, yeah, like the tangled complexity of the witch trial, I think Brom nails in this book. And I was thoroughly impressed with that. And I also really loved how he used the genre of horror. Instead of focusing on like the monster being what is horrifying, by the end of the book, you realize that Brom is pointing out to the horror that was the Puritan social experiment and just putting a light on actually how disturbing that was. We tend to just dismiss the Puritans as like religious fanatics. And we don't take seriously the social experiment that they were attempting and how really actually dystopian and disturbing that was. And that Brom really highlights really well in this book. I was impressed. The book does kind of end with a pretty much just a revenge fantasy of all of these evil leaders who have been involved in the witch trials getting graphically murdered by the monster, which feels really satisfying at the time. I do wish he had been able to come up with a little bit more of a nuanced ending beyond just murdering everybody. But it was emotionally satisfying for sure. But yeah, that's Slewfoot by Brom. Again, that one really took me by surprise, but actually is a very historically authentic book. And I would recommend it. It was a lot of fun. So there we go. There are my 6 most historically authentic books that I have read. Let me know if there's any major books I've missed that you feel like really are historically authentic and deserve a place on this list. Leave me a comment. I would love to hear about those books. I'd love to read some of them. I don't read a whole lot of historical fiction, so this doing the research for this video really highlighted that I need to be reading more historical fiction. So I would love to see your recommendations there. I'd love to review some of your books. And until next time, happy reading.